Right. Let's see. Marcia, looks like you're our lone virtual attendee at the moment. There
Well,
you
hello.
are. Hello, hello. Glad to have you. I got some feedback last week that people were deeply uncomfortable with my having their faces right up here on the screen and they could just look at themselves the whole time. So in honor of that, I'm just going to kind of keep that screen up, but that does mean, Marcia, that I can't see when you're raising your hand, or so you're just going to have to jump in and say excuse me, or somehow find some less polite way to interrupt me.
I can do that.
Excellent. Oh, that's great. And I think that we are right at yeah, a little after 7. Look at that. All right. So we're going to begin with our blessing again. It's up on the screen, and before we do, I'm going to ask in a few minutes about this past week. But I want you to just take a moment before we bless the act of engaging with Torah to just think about any effort you put into this process, even if it was just reflecting on what you might write or why you aren't writing or whatever it was. Just stop and think for a few moments about your engagement with the Torah of your life over the last week. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Funny digression. I was learning with my chavruta this afternoon, and it's before we got into our learning, I said, man, I'm really going to benefit today from our learning. I've had a lot going on, a lot of distractions, a lot of other things that I'm just not having fun doing right now. And I'm really looking forward to our learning and taking my mind off of all of that. So I'm just so glad. And so I said, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem. And right there's the demonstration of how badly I needed to turn off my brain and get into the act of learning. So here's the arc of our 3 sessions. Last session, we talked a bit about what this whole activity is, the shape that it can take, some of the considerations to get underway, really just with the brainstorming, with the beginnings of pulling deep from within our kishka, the elements that make us who we are. I had a wonderful conversation today with a almost 13-year-old who's celebrating bat mitzvah coming up. And she and I had this, I don't remember the last time I had this good a conversation with a kid like this, but we were talking about the essence of ourselves and what makes us who we are. And I kind of guided her a little bit in the discussion, but she's the one who articulated basically, well, we are just our memories and our stories are, and then I kind of added in, we are our successes and our traumas and our, I fell down when I was 4 years old and I got a scar on my forehead from that. I don't remember it, but it contributed to who I am today. I don't know how, but a little bit here and there. And so, she and I were just talking about how really the sum total of the difference between you and me is just our experiences, and some genetics too. But other than that, she was really keyed into the idea that you can't overstate how consequential our stories are. And so as you're starting this process of digging down into you and pulling out from within you, it could be that a story emerges that you haven't thought about in a long time. My guess is, unless you are using LSD or in deep hypnosis, you're probably not going to come up with stories that you didn't know you had. But you might come up with stories that you haven't interacted with in a long time. And that would be a gold mine, even if it doesn't make it into your ethical will. The act of engaging with you as Torah can't be wasted effort. So the first session was about setting up the idea. And I gave you the interim homework of beginning the process of using those starter sentences to stimulate thinking and maybe some disparate writing, just note taking, no cohesion at all. That's not the point. This session, we're going to talk a little bit about what this last week was like for you. I'm hoping that some of you will feel comfortable enough sharing whatever it was like. We're going to talk tonight about some of the obstacles that could present themselves in the process of writing, and there are endless obstacles, and maybe some ways to address that. Then we're going to talk about some more tangible techniques and considerations. And we're going to finish up with the homework, which is going to send you off this week with the goal of creating a draft. Even if you haven't written anything yet, don't worry if you haven't done the first stage. And then the third session, we will come back and we will process. I'm hoping that there'll be some of you willing to share pieces of what you've written. If it's something you feel comfortable sharing with us, what you would be doing is giving us the gift of your Torah, and by reading how you present yourself, we are being given holy access to some part of you that you want us to know. So that's the arc of our time together. So let's start with what I had suggested. Let's take a look back over this last week and see. By the way, I already apologized to a few of you who were here already. I was much better in the boot camp class about getting out class materials immediately and recordings immediately after we finished the session. And that has not been the case so far with this class. We'll see what happens tonight. So I'm sorry that I only got you that email with recording and some materials only a couple days ago. But for those of you who had some time this week to turn your attention to this project, what would you care or be willing to share with us? And we're down to one microphone for a short while. Yeah, Diane.
So when I left last week, I thought, what in the world? I mean, I really went, is this right for me? Can I do this? And I was driving the next day and something just hit me. And it hit me with a connection, a very important story from me, and a connection that might be useful for my family. And not that I haven't talked generally about it, but it really kind of tethered me to something that kind of took me other places. So that was good. But honestly, I walked out of here going, what am I going to do? Uh, I did. I did. And I've kind of gone in a few different directions. And I go back, I did it once, maybe a couple of nights ago, and then I looked at it again yesterday and today. And I made a few changes. And then I thought, well, I'll just sleep on it and think about it, what's really important. But I thought, wow, is somebody communicating with me going, hey, that might be useful. So, yeah. Mhm.
I like the way you just kind of playfully said, is someone communicating with me? Because I might just offer, because I'm the rabbi and it's kind of what I do, that yeah, you were engaged in communication, and that still small voice, the kol demama daka, that we read about from Isaiah's episodes. Sometimes we think of it as our conscious, or sometimes as our superego, or appropriately also as God. So for whatever was the source of that moment, I'm so glad you were listening. Sometimes those just fly right past us. Thank you. Yeah, Sharon.
So I listened to the session, and as I was digesting what I heard, what I've been kind of mulling over is, who am I doing this for? Am I doing it for me? Am I doing it for whomever I'm writing it for? Is it for both? And truly, what's the purpose? What's the why? So that's one thing. And then the other was, it was very freeing for me, the idea of writing an individual um, ethical will for different people, as opposed to trying to create a master document for everyone that I might want to have something to say to. So those are two different ideas that I'm playing with, and it could end up being that it is one as opposed to several. But I've been cooking and cleaning and having people pass through my home, and then stripping beds and doing more laundry and going to the store again for the same ingredients that I just purchased the day before, because I cooked it twice already and I'm cooking it again tomorrow, all before the holiday. So, but as I'm doing that, I just keep thinking about everything that happened in that session. And I have a piece of paper that I'm just writing things down on.
Yeah, the word that popped to mind that would have felt appropriate for use already is the word brainstorming. You know, we're in the brainstorming session, and Diane, I thought about it with you as well when you were saying that, oh, you know, you started here and you kind of digressed here and there, and who knows what it'll make. So I thought that was great, and that's that is how I write my sermons. You know, I don't know, I usually deliver 4 high holiday sermons, and I probably write a full extra 4 that never see the light of day. You know, that for whatever reason I was feeling it at the moment and I was drawn into it, and just the act of writing it proved meaningful to me for some reason. I don't know, I kept going. And the fact that it never got into the final versions or got put into a folder anyway, really did not diminish the value of the time spent on it. So I fully support jotting down ideas, meandering to see where your heart takes you, and worry about putting it together later. And you asked 2 really good, well, you asked a question and offered another thought that we'll come back to in a few minutes.
I also watched the first gathering online, and there are 2 parts that I was simultaneously thinking about. One was answering the questions and thinking about myself, and the other was still grappling with the formulative questions. Do you give it before or after? Is it one thing that's the same for everyone, etc.? And it's not finalized, but a couple of things I finally sorted out. Somehow I need to understand that first, because I need to know whom I'm speaking to in a way. I liked something at first, the idea of, well, yeah, if you could give it before, then they have a chance to ask you. And then I think something Tamra said about, in addition to your talking about the impact, the big moment of reading it after someone's gone versus receiving it 10 years before or whatever, but also it's supposed to be something that helps them. They've just experienced you're not there anymore. So that was very powerful to me. And I kind of made that decision afterwards. And then I pictured, okay, is it like I'm attending my Shiva and I'm talking to everybody collectively, or am I speaking to one-on-one? And, you know, does everybody know they're all getting the same thing? And then I felt, although I don't intend to give any direct advice about a person, what they should do, I'm really staying away from it. By nature, I'm a problem solver. I jump in when I hear anything and I come up with ideas and I offer them, and it can often be advice that was not asked for. So I'm very sensitive. But I did think I also want to tell them how proud I am of them in an individual way. And maybe to give it to couples, we have 4 kids, and say, I'm so proud of the life, and thank them for what they made me feel. So I want to give it separately, but the body will primarily be the same. And now I was then able to turn to the body, and I started really having some amazing insights. Like when you're talking about what was the life like, what was the world you were born into, and da 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 da. My whole life has been shaped by being born into a traditional world where women had no chance except to be a secretary or whatever, having a traditional home where my mother was given an allowance, and having all the obstacles my whole life, the critical, who are the influences in your life? It reflected that, who were the, etc. So without going into any more detail, I realize how much my whole life has been shaped by having to.
So what I was hearing eventually was that in addition to the direct messaging to the recipient, there is a body of the work to come along with it. Initially, if you'd stopped with that first piece, I would have said, do those. And those kinds of letters to survivors are something probably a little bit different in nature from an ethical will. But then you added on the fact that no, there's a body of material that will accompany this communication to the individual. I think that's great. Yeah, sure.
One thing on my mind, if I predecease Art, and I really don't need to say this to them, but all our children are by choice, not blood, was please take care of Art. When you had the question of what family members do you want to give? And it's something I've said to people verbally. It made me feel so great to think it's going to be in writing to each of them.
Lovely. Lovely. Folks at home, if anyone wants to jump in, like I said, I can't see you as easily this evening to let you to know that you've got your hand raised. So Edith, go ahead.
I've thought about this for a long time, and I've decided that the way I live my life is what I want my children to do, with very little deviation, because I feel very good about my life. And I just want to remind them that what I care about, I want them to remember to care about. But those things that I would tell them are the things that I care about in my life. And I see it now in my 2 of my 3 children. So it's almost like I don't have to say anything to them, but I thought it would be nice to put it in writing.
So my question at first to you was, will it be, I probably would have said something like, will it be out of character for them to receive a directive like this from you? And then I realized that it would be almost impossible for any of us to write something of this kind of personal nature that would be out of character. And what you said there at the end was really smart too. You almost don't need to say it. You said it too, Barbara. There's something about saying the things that don't need to be said that reinforce the consistency in the minds of your loved ones, that just remind them who you were. To hear you say, this was important to me and I want it to be important to you. That's the Edith they've known their whole lives. And so, yeah, you should speak your own truths in your own form. And that approach might work very differently for Barbara or for Wind. And that's kind of the beauty of these documents. These are not formulaic things that you just fill in the blanks. This is you. This is your voice, and it's based on the relationships that you already have, and it's like one more chapter of that relationship. Yeah, thank you. Wynn, do you want to think aloud?
I've been running away from this for years. And every winter holiday season, my my son and daughter-in-law have given me different writing instruments and colored pencils and notebooks and told me to tell my story. And I have put them on a shelf. I look at them at least maybe every other month. And I have sat down on a computer and have written a couple of chapters for it to share with them. But this past week, I felt like running away. And I ran away to Grace Farms on Shabbat. It was a rainy, drippy day, and sat in the library and reacquainted myself with poets. And I came across Joy Harjo. And she's a Native American poet that for the past 50 years, off and on, has been the poet laureate of the United States. And I came across, sitting down, reading her 50-year review, a poem that I'm going to include in my ethical will. And it's called The Life of Beauty. I will not read it. I just was going to say it. And I sent it to you because I thought you might enjoy seeing it. And the other thing is, I have conversations with my students on a regular basis about what does life mean to you. And I'm starting to write down some of those notes as part of this ethical will. Like, what does things that I say to them? So we have a conversation ongoing with one of my doctoral students in Canada about what does Passover mean at this point? And I talk about the importance of freedom and why it's important to be who you are.
Just because Wynn brought it up, I'll take a quick moment and show you one other example of a tool. This is a commercial way of doing the same thing. I don't know if this is the one that Cantor spoke about at High Holidays 2 years ago, maybe. But there are platforms like this, and my sister and I and our families ended up getting one. I don't think it was this one for my parents, and it's a subscription. You know, we bought the program, and then every week the platform sends a story, sends a question to my parents, and they sit and they write out their answers to the thing, and then they send it, they hit submit. And over the course of the year, a fairly robust collection of stories pops up. And then we get to put pictures in and edit the thing and put it all together as a book. And then I think I bought, 6 copies or something, one for each grandkid and then one for them. It's an element of ethical wills. Number one, though, if you're going to buy it for someone, make sure you talk with them about it first and make sure it's something they want. Because otherwise, I think just like Wind, my parents kind of struggled with it. They were not necessarily looking for the opportunity to write their life story every week. But it's another example of ways in which we're trying to ask people to share the most important part of themselves with us. Life is fast and distracting. And, how many of you wish you could have asked questions of those who are gone now? So these kinds of exercises are designed to, facilitate that a little bit better. Diane?
There's another one called Storyworth. Are you familiar with that? Yeah, I was just going to say Lindsay got it for me a couple of years ago and I did it, and now Billy's doing it for them. And it's so valuable.
Yeah, it's I think my parents have ended up enjoying it, but I don't think, I know I didn't use Storyworth, and I don't think I used this one either. There's a third one that we used. I don't remember what it was. Anybody at home want to share any reflections on what this last week was like for you?
I will say that it seems like the universe is telling me something. I just finished reading before the class started a book called Permission to Feel. And I was reading a novel that had lots of relationship hints, or it was a novel, but I was learning from it. And that all happened on top of the fact that I had started to write something to my son. So then last week happens, and everything's coming together. I have several pages of notes, but I don't have anything complete.
And what did it feel like to begin putting that material down on the pages of notes?
A little overwhelming. I mean, it feels good to try to sort through it, but it also feels complicated.
Yep, that's great. Thank you. I appreciate you sharing that. Barbara?
Just want to mention, I have perpetual writer's block, even if I'm writing a 1-sentence email to someone. And someone mentioned you can dictate with a certain app. If you have an iPhone, the dictation is so good. I have no problem talking, as you know. I just pick up the phone and I start talking, and it gets at 95%.
Okay, good. So Barbara is starting to transition us into, oops, that's not what I wanted, into the next part of this conversation this evening, which is, how do we do it? Now that we've begun to pull elements out of our psyche and we've begun to brainstorm, and maybe some of you have even seen some form start to take shape. Let's talk for a few minutes about obstacles. So what are going to be the sources of paralysis that could prevent someone from finding this to be an easy experience? You can just kind of put them out there and I'll repeat them for people at home. Yeah, Alan. Okay, good. Yep. Yeah. So Alan is saying that at this stage, without having clarity on his audience or his recipients, it can muddy the thought process. And I think that's exactly right. I did mention last week that that's an important question, but I didn't ask you to answer it. In another, I don't know, 10 minutes or so, we're going to be talking a little bit more about that, because you put your finger right on it. If you really want to create something with any kind of integrity to it, knowing some of the answers will be really essential. So if you don't know who you're writing to, that would be an obstacle. Excellent. What else? Yeah, David.
And what I find myself doing is, throughout the day, something pops through my mind, or I'll read an article and that article just triggers things. So what I'm doing is I'm just creating a document with links, sentences, as you said earlier, just random stuff, because I think it's going to take me a long time to really start answering all these questions. Who is it to? Is it to everybody? What do I want to put in it? What's important? What's not important? And so on. So this, for me, feels like a long-term project. But I'm just collecting the data for now.
Yeah. I was listening to you and thinking about that and realizing that I already, I think I mentioned that maybe next week some of you will have a draft, which is not a final, of course. It may never be final. I'll come back to that in a second. But it is a rapid timeline for me to suggest that over really 2 weeks worth of work, you might have a draft to show. So take the timeline pressure off your shoulders if that's something in the back of your mind as well. But be careful, because without the deadline, you will never go back to it, or you might never. So yeah, a sense of scale or time might be inhibiting. That's a good example. Thank you. Yeah, Sharon. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's great. Sharon said that that maybe the deadline actually will help her, uh, in my words, bring the process to a close rather than letting it get too big and maybe never experience completion. Did I tell you my daughter Neely, who's 10, has been writing a book for 3 years. The thing is 24 pages long and no one else has ever seen a word of it. She won't let us see it because it's not done. She needs to keep editing it. And we keep saying, sweetie, it's never going to be done. Just let us see what you're working on. I have no idea what's in there because she just is not ready to wrap it up. And so, you know, it's a case of the perfect being the enemy of the good. Yeah, Edith. Hmm. Yeah. 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 So no, not at all. You understand perfectly. What you understand is that your end product may look very different than somebody else's end product. There is no format. There's no set length. It's, you know, I get this question from every bar mitzvah kid. How long does my Devar Torah have to be? Right? It's the question every teacher hates. You know, it has to be long enough to be what you need it to be. You know, I've had students who've written Divrei Torah that are fabulous at a page, and I've seen plenty of students who write 5 pages and there's nothing in there. So do not worry about comparing format to somebody else. Thank you for that question. There are no shoulds in this process. Okay, let me offer a few others that sometimes I think can get people stuck. The first one is the sense of permanency. Permanence. Let's just stop with that. It is that sense that I've got to, you know, I've got one shot to do this. And if I don't get it right, or I forget and I leave something out, that I can never go back and fix it. And I was thinking about other examples of permanent products. And the ones that jump to mind, there were 3 actually. The first is the 10 Commandments. Right? When Moses is up there and, you know, carving something in stone, that's permanent. Even if you smash it, the second version is going to be the same. So, you know, that's an example. And then I was thinking about headstones, grave markers. And before a grave, a monument maker will push go on your order, they will, I think in most cases, make you get your rabbi's signature that you got the Hebrew correct, because they don't want to hear from you later on, hey, there's a typo here. They want to be darn sure that the first draft is the final draft. And then the third example that came to mind is, and this happens a lot, www.ketubah.com. is a fabulous website. And frankly, I send all my couples to start there and they all finish there. It's a site with thousands of pieces of artwork and then dozens of texts. And you go and find a piece you love, and then you find a text that speaks to you. And then they have an online form with all the names of everybody and the dates and the locations and all of that. And you fill it all in. It's super easy. But before you can purchase, they will not order it and print it for you until you give them the name of your officiant, and the rabbi checks it and makes sure that, you know, yep, they got it all right, because they're not going to fix it. You know, it's a permanent draft. And so those kinds of examples could elicit hesitancy, and you could get stuck there with this as well. But remember, there's there's, if you deliver it to somebody face to face and say, here, I want you to have this, and you live another 10 years, there's always the option to say, I've got an appendix. If you file it away to be delivered after you're gone, then it doesn't matter if you finished it. What you give them is exactly what they needed to get. And then the other thing too, which happens sometimes, is fear that we're going to forget something. You know, how could I have forgotten that story about the time that, and this happens to me when I've done a funeral intake with a family, and we've sat together for maybe a couple of hours and told stories about the deceased, and it's been great. And sometimes I'm there so long because they keep saying, oh, and what about the time that dad did it? And they've got another story and another story and another story. And then I'll get texts through the evening saying, we can't believe we forgot to tell. And sometimes I've now learned at the end of that time together to say something gentle like, you didn't tell me everything. You couldn't tell me everything. How could you have gotten everything to me in the course of an hour to encapsulate a human's life? So when you have those moments, think of them as lucky treasures that are yours now. Don't call me. You know, if you want to put them in your eulogy, go for it. Tell them at the Shiva house, or keep them to yourself as just a treasured remembrance with your loved one. So I bring that up as an assurance to you that you are going to fail at getting into your ethical will everything that you want to say. So leave that goal off the table and you'll be fine. Here's the next piece. I kind of heard it in the beginning of Sharon's observation or self-reflection. She said, writing isn't really something she's enthusiastic about. You went on to say, when you do it well enough. I would argue you do it well. I feel similarly. I don't love to write. I'm intimidated by it. And so here's an example. When I work with couples for weddings and we're talking about the ceremony, most couples don't have a lot of context for Jewish ceremonies. For many of them, their wedding is going to be the first one that they've ever been to, a Jewish wedding. That was the case for me. And so I have to really kind of paint a picture for them of the whole thing, start to finish. Maybe they have the picture of a chuppah in their mind and they have the picture of stomping a glass in their mind, but then they have pictures of, you know, running out of the church with rice being thrown on them and cans behind the car, because that's the movies, right? And what else is in the movies are those personal vows where they look right into each other's eyes in front of the whole congregation and they say something just so beautiful. And that's not Jewish. That's not a part of the Jewish ceremony. And so I say to them, of course you can do that if you want, but there is an enormous amount of pressure on the bride and groom to write the best thing that has ever been written. And it better be just as good as your partner, because I have seen a wedding where she took it really seriously and he seemed to have misunderstood the intent here. And it was really uncomfortable. Like he was goofing around in his vows back to her. And I think she was actually pretty insulted that, I mean, she should have known. I mean, you know who you're marrying, right? But so what I tell them is to remove the pressure of being perfect. Maybe you just write, if you want to write something, you write it, but then share it with each other in the yichud room after the ceremony's over. Take the pressure off. Use the traditional format of Hare at Mekudeshet li, and just take that pressure of perfection off. And so if you're a mediocre writer, welcome to the club. Most of us are. If we weren't, maybe we'd be, you know, New York Times contributors. I don't know. So don't worry if your writing leaves you feeling inadequate. Okay, I have a couple more examples. I think sometimes people wonder, do I have something important enough to say? If this is ethical transmission, are my ethics so special that I have something timeless or important enough to say? And I'll go back to what I said to Edith, which is, number one, probably you're not going to say much that's going to surprise your loved ones. Maybe you'll have some stories they haven't heard before. And your interpretation will certainly be novel just because of the format. But you're not looking to be the next Maimonides here. That's not the goal. The goal is simply to have them hear you in your own voice. And so don't worry whether you've got the smartest thing that's ever been said, and look forward to shocking your family with how eloquent and important your knowledge was. And what I wrote here is they want you, not Ernest Hemingway. Okay, so any other thoughts on obstacles and barriers to the process? Anyone at home? Okay. So let's get back now to some of those other questions like Alan was putting out there, because I think that this really is important. And if some of you have already arrived at real clarity about who's receiving this, I mean, I sort of heard from you that it sounds like you have, Barbara. And I heard Edith say it sounds like she knows exactly to whom she's going to write. This is important. It does materially affect how you'll approach it, as Alan was really appropriately articulating. Right now, you don't have to know. But when you sit down to actually craft the thing, you should have an audience in mind. Now, a reminder that it doesn't matter who the audience is. An appropriate answer to that is, I am the audience. I myself am my own audience, is what I mean. I don't mean I'm your audience. It is valid to say the exercise of writing this thing is enough. I'm not going to give it to anybody. That's appropriate. Deciding whether you want this to be a broad communication to everybody, that dictates one approach. Picking individuals, that's a different approach. And if you are going to tell every individual that they were your favorite, just make sure you set it up in a way that they're not reading it together. So they all think, oh, boy, I knew I was Dad's favorite. So, well, first of all, who knows who they're writing to? Who's made that decision? Anybody pretty clear, Barbara? The 4 kid sets? Right. So what Barbara is saying is that for those at home, they're going to 5 or 6 different households, but they're going to be addressed to the couple in the house. That's great. Thank you. Edith? Now, she said her children and grandchildren, a different version for each, or will they each get a copy of the same thing? Beautiful. She said she's going to give the same thing to everybody. Love it. Diane? Uh-huh. So Diana is saying that she's thinking about her daughter and grandkids, but then it occurs to her, what if she dies before her husband? How could she not have something to share with him? You don't owe him an ethical will. The nature of a partner, that relationship, is different than the nature of a matriarch to the family. I'm sorry if that hurt a little bit, that matriarch piece. But the partners expect something a little different. That makes me think more of that final set of 4 statements that hospice encourages people to say to their loved ones, which is, I wrote it down because I wanted to get it right this time. It is, please forgive me. I forgive you. Thank you. And I love you. That's the kind of stuff our partners would love to hear us say. And if there's an opportunity to communicate that, go for it. And maybe then do it again the next day and the day after that too.
I'm curious why, unless there's information that's very specific to a person where there's an apology or something very unique to them, I'm curious why people are considering having separate ethical wills.
That's a great question. And I have my own response. David asked whether yeah. So David's asking, what's behind choosing individualized communiques? He said to Diane, is there something that you would say to your daughter that you wouldn't want your grandkids to hear? And I think that's a great question. Alan's obviously thinking about this as well. Barbara told us she's going to have maybe preambles and then a body that's consistent. Edith has said, no, you know, this is a statement of who I am to everybody. Here I am. This is my ethical will, and it would be consistent. It is simply a matter of how you're approaching this interaction. And so I wouldn't say that it's right to do it one way or the other, but it's the right question. Yeah, Sharon.
So I'm not far enough along to have made that decision yet, but what I am doing in my note taking is if I feel as if something should be directed at one of my children, then I'm writing it that way. Much as if I'm sending out an email to multiple people but there are different messages for the different people and how you write that. And it's a difficult email to write. I'm thinking it will probably be easier to have the body of work the same, but the things that are personal within our relationship to be individual.
Think about the difference in relationship to the thing for the recipients. If they know that what they've received from mom was written to them, and it's different than what my sister got, that changes the nature. That's a communication, that's a conversation, a personal conversation with you. When you receive a uniform declaration for me to the world, it's less intimate, but it's more almost, I'm not trying to decide what the word I'm looking for is. Say it again. Yeah, that's good. Universal, right. And each of those is a really beautiful approach. You could do like a mail merge. Maybe we could like set up a, yeah, that's great. That's great. Anyone else want to think aloud about who they're writing to?
So I started 3 years ago or 4 years ago during the pandemic. And the person I was writing it to was Linda of blessed memory, who is my partner, who died 25 years ago. And that's still going to be one of the ethical wills that I write. The other one is going to be to my grandkids. So I think it's possible to write more than one.
I think it's very possible to write more than one. And for the rest of us, just pause for a second and think about what the first example that Wind shared. Think about how different that communication would be and what its purpose would be. And again, it's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. I love that. Of course it is. And it's, yeah. And it's in large part for yourself. And of course, you know, if Linda's spirit is still listening, then yeah. So, you know, I think there's a lot of recipients for that one. And it's totally different than how Edith is tackling it. I love that. Boy, beautiful. Okay. Waiting for more hands. Okay. So let's talk for a few moments about format. Okay. I told you that that I saw that that headstone in Michigan that had the web address carved into the back of it. You know, for this person, they understood that maybe even standing the test of time longer than a piece of granite on their grave was the digital signature that would last forever. You know, maybe that's the true timelessness now. But let's kind of rattle off in our minds a couple different formats that this thing can take. It can be as simple as, my God, I'm just going to rattle off a bunch. You keep populating the list, but it could be a stack of pages that you printed out from your computer and stapled in the corner with someone's name on the top corner. That's a valid approach. It could be one page, nicely formatted, concise, with no addressee at the top because it's for everybody. And at the bottom, are you going to sign your name maybe in actual handwriting? It could be on lovely stationery. If you have good handwriting and that for you is a no, me either, is a method for intimacy, to sit there and handwrite out what it is you want to leave. It could be, I was thinking about Barbara dictating into the phone. They can be audio messages. If you create something that has cohesion to it and has got a nice integrity, but then you want to read it, it can either accompany the written form or it can be, you know, the actual ethical will. It doesn't have to be on paper. It can be a video log. You know, there's lots of options, including our phones, but there's lots of ways to sit in front of the computer, again, maybe with your notes pretty well ordered so that it doesn't feel like you rambling, but you looking at the little camera on your computer and talking to the screen. I mean, you can all, again, put yourself in the shoes of somebody who receives one of those. And, you know, Dad died, you know, 3 weeks ago, and what I wouldn't do to have one more conversation with him. And then you find out that he left you an audio ethical will, and you hear his voice again on the recording, and you think, holy cow, there it is. There's this last conversation that I wanted to have with him. Or, you know, the face, you know, think about your face today. It's different than it was 20 years ago. It's different than it will be in 20 years. Imagine them getting to look at your face again in this kind of strength. We all know our strength is going to diminish. We're going to be less and less and less full, vibrant versions of ourselves. To capture yourself now as you are today in a video log to them could be powerful. That might speak to you. I'm looking to see if I have any other examples that I thought of. Any other examples of format that occur to you? David?
I wonder if within the document, there are chapters or sections based on what you want to talk about. It can be divided in all different ways, but it doesn't have to be just one long thing.
It does. And go ahead.
This is just a little aside, I think, but I never thought about doing an audio, but my mother, the Mother's Day before she died, she was a chocoholic, and of course we sent her chocolate, and she called and left a message on my phone. And we all have it. We've all kept it in her beautiful Southern accent. And she had found a third layer on the bottom. There's a third layer. And it was just, you can't pay for that. You just can't pay for that. So yeah, that's a whole other idea. Mhm.
I also have an idea, which is a book that would have chapters and you could put pictures in it. We did that. My mom used to write memoirs, and we put it all together and we added pictures, and that's a beautiful memory to have.
So this is not an ethical will, but my kids asked all of their grandparents if they could record the history of their lives There's nothing, not an ethical will, but just how was it being a kid or a teenager in school and so on. And it was very moving both for the kids and for the grandparents to do that. And it's a video recording and it'll always be there. Nothing ethical about it, just the story.
I did the same thing, but I'll warn you, when I did that with my grandmother, must have been, I'm going to guess, around 1985 or I don't know, 1990-ish. And in the world those days, we used cassette tapes. And now I still have one last cassette player in my home that I hold on to for a couple last things on cassette tapes. Formats change. Yeah. Anyone else? So back to David's point. I think that that chapters are an option depending on how lengthy we're talking about. But it can also be a decision whether you're going to make this more of a memoir, which might benefit from a chronology versus topical or versus simple wisdom literature. So don't assume that telling your life's story is the only approach. That may not serve your purposes. If Edith is looking for a page, she's not going to tell her life's story. She may tell a couple sentences about things that have affected her, and that may be just enough for her purposes. Yeah, Barbara.
What would you think about, in addition to the preamble, would be specific to the person, if the main body referenced the course, or not knowing exactly how to approach this, I'm relying on suggestions our rabbi asked us to think about and responding to them, and literally having your questions and then writing my answers to it. Otherwise, I have to thread the whole thing together.
So we'll get back to that little piece in a moment. With regard to your first question, let's wait and see if it comes out good. If it's good, then you can go ahead and give me some credit in having, helped with the structure and the approach. If it comes out lousy, I don't want you to put me in there. I know, I'm just teasing you. I think if sorry, you know me better than that. If that helps get what you're looking for onto the page, yeah, do that. Do that. Yeah. I'll simply remind you that a question to ask is your imagined delivery. What are you looking for? Some of you have really responded powerfully to the idea of this making it to the hands of your recipient after you're gone. For some of you, that really speaks. Diane's nodding. She just told us a story about her mom's voice after she's gone. Like that, those are beautiful images. And if you would like to hand it to them and watch their reaction and maybe engage with what's in there, that's a different approach. And so it's a question to be answered. Like Alan was saying, when you have too many possibilities, you can get lost in the process. Yeah, Edith.
And recovering from some brain surgery, and he wrote his autobiography. I mean, it's a volume. I read it because we all read it. Actually, we bound it. He ended it up with one sentence that summed up his whole life and the way he felt, which, just for your information, was that leadership matters in all things. That was his sentence. When I saw him writing this, I said, there's no way on earth that I could ever write an autobiography. First of all, just the patience of doing it. But he sat there and just kept writing. Then maybe that's why I'm thinking of one page. It's nice to have it, but it's so much. And I'm thinking one page might be just enough for people to remember.
I completely validate that way of thinking. It made me think of another congregant who I know who had a remarkable life and did something very similar. And I have a copy because it's very long. And I wonder, I bet his daughter read it. Did his grandkids read it? I don't know. You know, probably not. Maybe I'm wrong. Probably I'm wrong. But what you're getting at is maybe the difference between an autobiography and an ethical will. Now, for any of you who've written your autobiography, this is not judgmental, but there's an element of hubris that goes into sharing your story because you obviously think others need to hear it. An ethical will may not look like that. But I don't want you to get paralyzed by the question of, who am I to share my ethical bequest with others? You can get caught somewhere in between those two poles of, I'm not worthy of writing an ethical will versus everybody should read my autobiography. Those are two poles that you don't need to spend time at. Yeah. And maybe that is why you're focused on a page. I totally relate to that. That's great. Okay. How are we doing on time? I think, yeah. Actually, I wasn't sure we'd even need to take this much time. It's just such a great conversation tonight. So here is the homework for this week. If you have created already a batch of material and you're seeing it come together and the ideas have begun to coalesce, and maybe you've got snippets, and I think you said it, Barbara, stitching it together. Was that you? Yeah. Otherwise, you'd have to stitch it all together. This week is about starting to focus in and to identify, for years, I don't do it so much anymore, but for years, my poor writing skills from my ADHD would mean that my sermons would be all over the place. All the ideas were there, but it would take a genius to follow them. And so Julie, God bless her patience, finally got me to sit down on the floor and to literally cut my pages apart into chunks and to arrange them around me on the floor and figure out what order they actually should go in. That was my process for stitching together my disparate thoughts. Something like that, or at least that way of thinking, might help you. What I do with the B'nai Mitzvah kids is we brainstorm ideas, we process, and they talk about the sibling rivalry of the brothers in Genesis. And I say, that's so cool. What a great idea. Why don't you go home this week and write me a paragraph on sibling rivalry? They'll come back the next week and we'll talk about it. And we'll say, oh man, that's so great. What about you and your sister? Do you guys have any of this? And they'll say, yeah, we totally have this. And I'll say, good, go home this week and write me a paragraph about how this reminds you of you and your sister. And then they'll come back the next week and say, oh, this is so great. What about jealousy in general? And then I'll send them home for another paragraph. And before they know it, they've written all these paragraphs and all we got to do is stitch them together. And it's surprisingly easy. So for those of you who've already been doing what I think is the hard work of really mining the truths from your story, you've probably already got the essentials out of the cockles of your brain. So this week, we're going to try and see if we can bring them together to, again, don't worry about a draft. If you get a paragraph that you really like this week, fabulous. That's great. Next week, I'm going to invite anybody who is really feeling kind of good about what they've written to feel free to share it. If it's a bound volume, I'll probably ask you to pick a couple of excerpts. But very often, some part of our effort will really speak to us. And you're not going to share any, part in your ethical will where you apologize to your children for, I don't know, cheating on their mother. I don't know, whatever. You know, you keep that stuff to yourself, but you'll tell us if you're willing, something to share, and it will be received with an enormous amount of gratitude, because again, this is self-revelatory. This is you showing us what you value about you and hoping that we honor that. And I promise you that we will. So I think if there's anything else that I wanted to send you off with to aid in the effort, I offer myself as a thought partner for anybody who's getting stuck on how to articulate what it is they're, or who just wants another set of eyes. I volunteer. And if you, have something to share with me that, excuse me, something to share with me that you don't want to share here, but you're okay with me saying. Also, I'll remind you that I volunteered for anyone who likes that idea of delivery after I'm gone. I'm offering to be the mailman. So you can give me your instructions and I will execute your wishes to the letter. David? I did. You didn't get it? Okay. I will go back and make sure. Did everyone else get the material, the recording, and did you? I think you hadn't registered yet. Yeah. Okay. So I that doesn't surprise me. I'm not sure why I didn't get it to you, David. I'll. Okay. Thank you. I was probably gonna. Yes, Edith.
A lot of inscriptions on headstones, but there was one that I saw, and I think it was on Cape Cod. And on the inscription, it said, "I told you I was sick." I've never, ever seen anything.
I love that. Oh my God. And he or she must have insisted beforehand, this is what I want you to put on my headstone. Because without that, his or her family never, come on, who are we kidding? It was a him. They never would have done that on their own. That's fabulous. That's fabulous. Sharon?
It's about on my dad's headstone. He was left-handed. He was very, very proud of being left-handed and how smart he was because he was left-handed. And every time we would go into a restaurant, he chose where to sit because it was all about his left hand. So he was a proud member of the Knights of Pythias in Albany, New York, and he was the Grand Poobah for a while and treasurer, whatever. So what's that? Of the Knights of Pythias. And it was a Jewish organization, though it was non-secular, but it was Jewish in Albany. And they did a lot of charitable work, a lot of fundraising for MS. So that was one of his many causes. So my brother and I decided we wanted to have the emblem of the Knights of Pythias on his headstone, but where to put it? Do we put it on the front? Then we need to have something on my mom's side after she passes. Ultimately, we decided to put it on the back of the headstone on the left-hand side. So that was our love letter to our dad.
I'd be willing to wager that the individual was Russian. Russian. What's that? Probably they were first generation. I don't know to what extent that tradition is being continued with the kids of Russian Jews. But yeah, it's very common. Maybe Ukrainian as well, but yeah. Oh, sorry, folks at home. Edith's asking about portraits carved onto the gravestone. Yeah. Well, I've seen both carved into the stone and I've seen kind of raised, almost porcelain looking kind of oval, like pictures of it. Yeah, very common. Yeah, if you go over to Bethel Cemetery, you'll see plenty of them. Yeah. 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 See, now I'm doubting myself, but I'm going to go back and check. I'll take a field trip tomorrow. All right. I'll go tonight with a flashlight. Fine.
My grandfather's has an oval metal picture set into the cemetery. And this is at the what's it called? The Montefiore, where Rabbi Schneerson is now. There's a lot of young Russians with like holographs, huge pictures, like 3-dimensional, that are.
Well, so I think it begs the question too, which version of me would I want in the picture? I'm certainly going to have more hair than this. I'm thinking back from my like swim team days when I had all my muscles. I'm going to go that route, yeah. Yes, Evgen's suggesting AI. Just make the best version of me possible. Thank you. Right on. Oh, thanks everyone. I hope you have a great night. I'm really looking forward to next week. See you soon.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone at home.
Thank you.
Hey, Connie, have a good night.
Thank you very much. You too.